The tragedy of Richard Gere is that the world only remembers the charming man in the white suit. We remember the seductive gaze in American Gigolo. Remember the moment he carried Julia Roberts in his arms in Pretty Woman. Remember the name engraved twice by People magazine with the title, The Sexiest Man Alive. We remember the perfect romantic icon that Hollywood created, the dream lover of millions of women. But what we often forget, or have never known, is the real person behind the screen who has spent his entire life fighting for things that made the very industry that created him turn its back. He played the perfect lover on screen to the point where the public believed that was his true self. But in real life, he has gone through 3 marriages, 2 long and painful divorces, and decades of quietness amid the spotlight where no one saw the loneliness inside. Today, at the age of 76, Richard Gere does not live in Beverly Hills. He lives in Madrid, a European city far from Hollywood, where he takes his 2 young children to the park every morning, meditates in a quiet house with his 3rd wife, and has almost disappeared from American media. The star who once dominated global box offices now lives a life that most audiences do not even know about. In 1993, he stepped onto the stage at the Oscar Awards ceremony in front of more than 1 billion television viewers, tasked with presenting an award. And instead of reading the nominations, he condemned the Chinese government on human rights in Tibet. 90 seconds of speech, 20 years banned. There was a permanent ban from China, the billion-person market that every Hollywood studio wanted to please, turning him from an A-list star into a financial burden that no studio wanted to touch. But this is not the story of a man easily defeated. This is the story of a man who voluntarily stepped down from the peak and found what the peak never gave him. How could a man standing at the top of Hollywood choose to leave? And how, on the other side of that abandonment, did he find the peace that his brilliant career never brought? Before we look through the screen to find the real person behind the legend, please subscribe to the channel and leave a like for Richard Gere. To understand the man who chose to leave Hollywood at his peak, we must go back to where it all began. Richard Tiffany Gere was born on August 31, 1949 in Philadelphia, Pennsylvania, into a middle-class family of English origin. His father, Homer George Gere, sold insurance locally. His mother, Doris Ann Tiffany, was a housewife. He had 1 older brother and 3 younger brothers. His childhood was not one of extreme poverty, and it was that stability and quietness without storms that shaped him in a completely different way from most Hollywood stars. Children who grow up in tragedy often seek survival. Richard Gere grew up in stability. He began to seek meaning, and it would follow him throughout the rest of his life. The family moved to Syracuse, New York, where young Richard attended North Syracuse Central High School. He was good at gymnastics, trumpet, piano, guitar, but none of them kept him for long. It was not because he lacked talent, but because he was looking for something whose name he himself did not yet know. He needed a place where mind, emotion, and instinct were all allowed to exist. After graduating from high school, Gere entered the University of Massachusetts Amherst with a major in philosophy. He was not looking for a way to make a living. He was looking for a way to understand why he lived. But after 2 years, academic philosophy was not enough. He dropped out of college, the first decision in a long series of choices that went against the path the world had drawn for him. No degree, no clear plan, only a vague intuition that the answer he was seeking lay somewhere on the stage. Gere began with summer theater programs in New England, performing with the Provincetown Players on Cape Cod and the Seattle Repertory Theater on the West Coast. It was the world of small theaters, halls with a few dozen seats, where actors stood just a few steps from the audience, with no beautiful camera angles, no montages, no background music to cover up weak moments. The stage demanded absolute authenticity, but that very requirement suited him. Gere's first professional role on stage was in Tom Stoppard's Rosencrantz and Guildenstern Are Dead, a play about 2 minor characters in Hamlet thrown into a world they did not understand, could not control, and did not know why they existed. The coincidence was almost perfect. The boy who dropped philosophy stepped onto the stage to perform a play about the absurdity of existence. Philosophy, music, and acting, the 3 paths he had once walked, began to converge at a point he had not yet seen clearly but had begun to feel. He continued to Broadway, taking on the role of Danny Zuko in the stage version of Grease in 1973, and proved that he could sing, dance, and hold the stage with a natural charisma that very few actors possessed. Gere's first step into the film world was a supporting role in Report to the Commissioner in 1975. Then came a more notable supporting role in Looking for Mr. Goodbar in 1977, starring alongside Diane Keaton, where he left a strong enough impression for Hollywood to begin remembering his name. But the film that truly shaped him as a film artist was Days of Heaven in 1978, under director Terrence Malick. This was not a commercial blockbuster. It was a work of art, slow, beautiful to the point of pain, and almost without dialogue. Malick did not need Gere to say much. He needed Gere to exist in front of the lens, and Gere did that with a naturalness that very few actors achieved. Right from his first truly important film, Gere chose art over commerce, depth over revenue. That was a choice he would repeat many times in his life, and each time, the world would make him pay a different price for that choice. In 1980, American Gigolo, directed by Paul Schrader, who had seen Gere's potential in Days of Heaven, cast him as Julian Kay, a high-class gigolo in Los Angeles who wore Armani suits like armor and used charm as a survival weapon. The film turned Richard Gere from a promising actor into an international sex symbol overnight. Suddenly, he was no longer the boy from Syracuse. He was the embodiment of masculine allure on screen, mysterious, dangerous. The role that made him a sex symbol was also the role about a man perfect on the outside but empty inside. Julian Kay was desired by everyone, but no one truly saw him. 2 years later, an officer and a gentleman pushed him to a completely different height. The role of Zach Mayo, the rebellious, stubborn boy beaten up by life but ultimately redeemed by love, touched something very deep in the global audience's psychology. And then came the final scene. Gere in his white naval uniform stepping into the factory, carrying Deborah Winger in his arms and walking out amid the music Up Where We Belong playing. That moment became one of the most iconic romantic images in film history, repeated, parodied, honored for decades afterward. The box office exploded. Hollywood officially found the perfect formula. And from here, the industry would never want him to do anything other than repeat that formula. He starred in many more films throughout the 1980s. The Cotton Club with Francis Ford Coppola, King David, No Mercy, Internal Affairs. But Hollywood always pulled him back to the familiar frame. The handsome, charming, and romantic man. Then in 1990, Pretty Woman was born, and Richard Gere reached the absolute peak that very few actors in film history had ever reached. The role of Edward Lewis, the cold billionaire melted by Julia Roberts' prostitute, was not just a role. It was a cultural phenomenon. The film grossed more than $460 million worldwide, turning a modern fairy tale into something the whole world shared. Richard Gere at age 40 was still charming to the point of disbelief. And the image of him in a black suit, standing next to the white limousine, holding a red bouquet of flowers, looking up at the balcony, that image belonged to the collective memory of an entire generation. The chemistry between Gere and Julia Roberts reunited in Runaway Bride in 1999, and audiences still bought tickets as if 9 years had not passed. While he played the role of a billionaire saving women on screen, in real life, his marriage was beginning to crack. In 1988, at an outdoor barbecue party, hosted by legendary photographer Herb Ritts, the two biggest sex symbols of the era met. Richard Gere, 38 years old, a movie star at his peak. Cindy Crawford, 22 years old, a supermodel dominating every magazine cover on the planet. They started dating immediately, moved in together in New York, shared a common interest in Buddhism and meditation, and traveled together to India and Nepal. The world looked at them and saw absolute perfection. In 1991, they went to Las Vegas and secretly got married. That same year, at the Oscar Awards ceremony, Crawford walked the red carpet in the legendary red Versace dress, hand in hand with Gere, a red carpet moment repeated for decades afterward as the definition of allure. In 1993, People magazine honored them as sexiest couple alive, the sexiest couple on the planet. Everything looked like a fairy tale. But beneath the perfect surface built by the media, two very different worlds were colliding that the lens could not capture. The 20-year-old girl was beginning to grow up, seeking her own identity, wanting to define herself outside the shadow of her famous husband. The 40-year-old man was beginning to retreat deeper into his inner world, into Buddhism, into questions of meaning that red carpets and camera flashes could not answer. Two journeys in search of meaning went in opposite directions in one marriage. But the world did not know that yet. The world still only saw perfection. In 1999, when people officially honored Richard Gere as the sexiest man alive, making him one of only 4 men to ever appear on the cover of that title twice, along with Brad Pitt, George Clooney, and Johnny Depp. But at the exact moment he was officially honored as the sexiest man on the planet, he had been divorced from Cindy Crawford for 4 years. He had been banned from the Oscar Awards for 6 years. And he had begun to be pushed to the sidelines by Hollywood because of political choices that the entertainment industry did not want anyone to mention. The peak of image and the peak of loneliness coincided in a perfectly bitter way, because it was at the time when the world loved him the most that Richard Gere began to listen to a completely different call, a call coming from far away from Hollywood, from the snow-covered mountains of Tibet, and from the gentle voice of an exiled high monk whom he called his teacher. In the early 1970s, when he was still an unknown stage actor, Gere began to study Zen Buddhism. The boy who had dropped philosophy at university did not really abandon philosophy. He just took it out of the lecture hall. Zen gave him the discipline of meditation, gave him the habit of quietness, but had not yet given him answers deep enough. Then the encounter that changed everything happened at the end of the 1970s, when his first film was screened at the Cannes Film Festival. Instead of staying in France to enjoy the European lights, Gere bought a ticket to India and Nepal. At a refugee camp near Pokhara, Nepal, he met Tibetan exiles for the first time. Many years later, he described that moment as feeling like stepping into another world, and then realizing that it was the real world. From Zen Buddhism, he moved to Tibetan Buddhism of the Gelugpa lineage, becoming a student of the 14th Dalai Lama. The boy who dropped out of college because academic philosophy was not alive enough finally found living philosophy in the gentle voice of an exiled monk. In 1987, he co-founded Tibet House US to preserve Tibetan culture and philosophy. In 1991, the same year he married Cindy Crawford, he established the Gere Foundation, a private fund supporting Tibetan human rights, health, education, and emergency relief. In 1992, he joined the board of directors of the International Campaign for Tibet and became chairman from 1995, a position he holds to this day, more than 30 years later. Gere spoke before the U.S. Senate Foreign Relations Committee, before Congress, before the European Parliament, before the United Nations Human Rights Committee in Geneva. He sponsored the Dalai Lama's visits to New York. He used his money, time, and fame, knowing clearly that every time he opened his mouth about Tibet, he was putting his career on the betting table. In parallel, he opened a second front, the fight against HIV/AIDS. He established Gere Foundation India Trust in Delhi in 1999, collaborated with the Avahan AIDS Initiative of the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation, and was honored by AMFAR, Amnesty International, Harvard AIDS Institute. He received the CARE Humanitarian Award, the Eleanor Roosevelt Award, awards that no entertainment magazine bothered to report because they were not glamorous enough. All of it happened quietly, patiently, over many decades. But then one night, the quietness ended. March 1993, the 65th Academy Awards ceremony. Just 3 years after Pretty Woman, Gere was still at his peak, a global sex symbol, the highest paid star in Hollywood. He was invited on stage to present the award for Best Art Direction for the film Howard's End. The simple task, read the nominations, open the envelope, announce the winner. He stepped up, standing in front of more than 1 billion live viewers. And instead of reading the nominations, he spoke about Tibet. He mentioned the number of 1 billion people watching. He spoke about the horrifying human rights situation in China. He called on Deng Xiaoping to withdraw troops from Tibet. 90 seconds. Just one man saying what he believed was right, in the place with the most listeners. The hall applauded. But behind the scenes, the dominoes began to fall. Gil Cates, the producer of the awards show, called the speech arrogant, objectionable, and dishonest. He said, "I will not invite him to my house, and I will not invite him to any future ceremonies." Richard Gere was banned from attending the Oscars for 20 years. China banned him from entering the country permanently. Every film with his name was banned from screening across Chinese territory. Studio after studio, producer after producer, director after director gradually removed Richard Gere's name from lists for major roles because he had become a financial risk, an A-list star whose presence in any film automatically lost the entire Chinese market. In an industry that measured everything by revenue, conscience was a luxury no one wanted to pay for. Richard Gere never apologized, never retracted, never explained. In a world where every celebrity hired PR teams to control crises and manage images, Gere chose silence. Many years later, when a Variety reporter asked him about that night, he only said, "I don't take it personally. I don't think there's anyone bad in that situation. I did what I did." He revealed that he had never discussed the event with the Dalai Lama. It was never mentioned. In 2013, 20 years later, he returned to the Oscar stage and calmly said a sentence that only a man who had meditated for 40 years could say. It seems if you stay long enough, they forget that they banned you. No bitterness, no triumph, just a gentle, almost humorous observation about how the world works. 90 Seconds on the Oscar stage in 1993 had traded for 20 years, banned from the industry's most prestigious awards ceremony. A permanent entry ban from the world's most populous country. Dozens of major roles lost, and a slide from top star to actor in little-seen films. The Gere Foundation is still operating today. Tibet House US still stands strong after nearly 40 years, and millions of dollars have flowed to human rights, health, and cultural preservation programs around the world. After Pretty Woman in 1990, Richard Gere was still one of the biggest names in Hollywood. But throughout the next decade, the list of blockbuster films inviting him grew shorter and shorter. In 2002, Chicago, the musical film adapted from the Broadway play, gave Gere the role of Billy Flynn, the silver-tongued lawyer who knew how to turn every courtroom into a stage. Gere sang, danced, charmed, and proved he could do everything Hollywood once loved him for. He won the Golden Globe for Best Actor in a Musical or Comedy. He won the SAG Award with the cast. Chicago won Best Picture at the Oscars that year, but Richard Gere was not nominated for an Oscar individually. The film brought the highest awards to everyone, except the man who had been banned from attending that very awards ceremony 10 years earlier. After Chicago, instead of returning to the peak, Gere quietly turned to a different path, independent films. And there, separated from box office pressure and commercial politics, he found the best roles of his life. Arbitrage in 2012, the role of an investment fund billionaire hiding a financial fraud, brought him a Golden Globe nomination and was called by many critics the best performance of his career. Norman in 2016, the role of a small Jewish fixer in New York trying to connect powerful people while his own life was in free fall, was a small, subtle film, highly acclaimed, and almost no one watched. But the film that said the most about this period in Gere's life was Time Out of Mind in 2014. He played a homeless man wandering the streets of New York. To prepare for the role, Gere wore ragged clothes, sat on the sidewalk, and walked among the crowds of Manhattan during rush hour. No one recognized him. The man who had once been the sexiest man alive, the man who had once made 1 billion Oscar viewers hold their breath, sat on a New York sidewalk in broad daylight and was completely invisible. That was the perfect image for his disappearance from public consciousness. He continued to act regularly. 3 Christs in 2020, Maybe I Do in 2023, Longing in 2024. But they were all small films shown in limited theaters or lesser-known streaming platforms. The quality of acting equal to or surpassing his peak period. But the audience had gone elsewhere. Gere became what critics called cinema's best-kept secret. Praise that sounded like condolences. Then his body also began to remind him that time did not stand still. In February 2023, during a family vacation in Mexico for Alejandra's 40th birthday, Gere had a severe cough and was hospitalized. Diagnosis: pneumonia. At 73 years old, he spent the night in the hospital and was discharged the next day with antibiotics. Alejandra shared that he felt much better. It was not a major event, but it reminded him of something that fame and meditation could not change. He was no longer young. In the mid-2010s, Richard Gere stood at the lowest point of his career. No more blockbusters. No more big red carpets. No more magazine covers. The divorce from Carrie Lowell was dragging on in a Manhattan courtroom. He was 65 years old, living alone in a quiet house in the New York suburbs, and to most people in the entertainment industry, he had become the past. The man who played Edward Lewis in Pretty Woman, Zach Mayo in An Officer and a Gentleman, Ike Graham in Runaway Bride, three of the most iconic romantic characters in film history, had in real life gone through 2 divorces before finding peace and love at the age of 68. The marriage with Cindy Crawford, the sexiest couple on the planet, eloping to Las Vegas in 1991, the world looked and saw perfection, but perfection only lasted 4 years. What broke the marriage was not scandal or infidelity, but a soul gap. Crawford later admitted on the WTF podcast, "I think the problem was we were many other things, but I don't know if we were ever friends because I was young and he was Richard Gere. She was 22 when she met him. He was 38. From the outside, the 17-year age difference did not matter. From the inside, they were 2 people in completely different stages. The girl was seeking her own identity, wanting to step out from the shadow of her famous husband. The man was retreating deeper into Buddhism, into meditation, into questions that red carpets could not answer. The 2 journeys in search of meaning went in opposite directions. Crawford also blamed the schedule. "We thought flying from Paris to LA to see each other for one night was fine, but it wasn't. The media pressure was so great that the couple had to issue a joint statement affirming that they were heterosexual and monogamous and have no plans to divorce. A normal couple would never need to say those things. The divorce in 1995 was quiet. 20 years later, Crawford described Gere as like a stranger, but life has loops that no one predicts. By 2026, the frosty relationship between the 2 began to thaw because of the children. Homer Gere, Richard's son, and Kaya Gerber, Cindy's daughter, were starring together in Ryan Murphy's series The Shards. 30 years after the divorce, the next generation pulled the 2 strangers closer together. But if the marriage with Crawford fell apart because of a soul gap, then there was something else that clung to Gere more persistently, a completely fabricated rumor that he had to Kekkeri for nearly 40 years. From the mid-1980s, Gere was attached to a vulgar story involving a gerbil and an emergency room. It was completely untrue. Snopes debunked it. No hospital records. No evidence. The origin was said to be an anonymous person impersonating an announcement from the Animal Protection Association, and then faxing it all over Hollywood right after Pretty Woman turned Gere into the biggest star in the world. Many suspected Sylvester Stallone was behind it due to personal conflicts from the film The Lords of Flatbush in 1974. Stallone always denied it. The rumor entered pop culture: Scream, The Simpsons, urban legend, stand-up comedy. Conan O'Brien called it the most ridiculous, untrue rumor in entertainment history. Any other star would hire lawyers, hold press conferences, issue statements. Gere did nothing. Not a single official interview about it. Not a single statement. The silence in the face of the gerbil rumor, silence after the 1993 Oscars, belonged to the same quality. Richard Gere did not explain himself to the world. He just lived. After Crawford, Gere was more careful. He dated Carrie Lowell, the actress who once played a Bond girl in License to Kill, for 7 years before marrying in 2002. They had a son, Homer James Jigme Gere, born in February 2000. Jigme means fearless in Tibetan, the Buddhist imprint that Gere engraved into his son's life. But 10 years later, history repeated itself. In 2013, Lowell filed for divorce, citing irreconcilable differences. The familiar reason: Gere wanted privacy, quiet, meditation. Lowell wanted socializing, living among New York high society. The man who considered quietness the core of life twice could not find a life partner to share that quietness with. Custody of Homer was resolved quickly. But the asset battle dragged on for 4 years, disputing an estimated fortune of $100 to $120 million in a Manhattan courtroom. Before meeting the judge, Gere and Lowell sat next to each other, chatting amicably, each reading their own copy of the New York Times. When the judge called the case name, Gere was so absorbed in reading the newspaper that he did not hear. Lowell herself had to call him Richard. No hatred. Just 2 people who no longer had reasons to be together. The divorce was finalized in October 2016, with Lowell reportedly receiving around $33 million. In 2007, at an HIV awareness event in New Delhi, Gere hugged and kissed Bollywood star Shilpa Shetty on the cheek multiple times on stage, a normal action by Western standards. But in conservative India, it became a national scandal. Hardline Hindu groups burned effigies of Gere in many cities. The Jaipur court issued an arrest warrant, calling the kiss an act crossing all limits of decency. Gere apologized, explaining he wanted to prove that a kiss does not transmit HIV. The Indian Supreme Court eventually dismissed all charges, calling them cheap publicity stunts. But the charges against Shetty dragged on for 15 years, only fully dismissed in 2022. Even when Gere did good, advocating against AIDS, saving lives, the world still found ways to make him pay. 2 broken marriages, a fabricated 40-year rumor, an arrest warrant in India, a ban in China, 20 years missing from the Oscars. The man millions of women dreamed of on screen was the one who struggled the most with love in real life. But he never stopped searching. And what he was searching for was waiting at a small hotel by the beach in Positano, where a 31-year-old Spanish woman would look into his eyes and see what the whole world had missed. In 2014, at a small hotel in Positano on the Amalfi coast of Italy, Richard Gere met Alejandra Silva. He was 64 years old, in the middle of a prolonged divorce from Carrie Lowell. She was 31 years old, ending her marriage to Govind Friedland, son of mining billionaire Robert Friedland. 2 wounded people met in a place that did not belong to either of their worlds. The hotel belonged to Alejandra's family. A mutual friend introduced them. Alejandra later told Hola magazine, "We looked at each other and felt a very strong connection. We couldn't take our eyes off each other all night, and from then on we haven't been apart." A 33-year age difference, double the gap with Cindy Crawford. But this time, everything was different from the root. Alejandra was not a Hollywood supermodel or an actress seeking spotlight. She was a Spanish political activist and public relations professional, daughter of a former vice president of the Real Madrid football club. She shared with Gere what his 2 previous wives could not share. Not fame, not high society life, but beliefs, values, and a way of looking at the world. The man who had failed twice in marriage because he could not find anyone to share that quietness with finally met a woman who understood that quietness. In April 2018, they secretly married in a small civil ceremony. The 3rd marriage, no red carpet, no magazine coverage, no Las Vegas. Just 2 people who found each other later than most. And because it was later, they cherished it more. A few months later, Alejandra became pregnant. And there is a photo from that time that if you look at it, you will understand Richard Gere more than any film he has ever made. The Dalai Lama, the spiritual teacher Gere had followed for more than 40 years, placed his hand on Alejandra's pregnant belly, blessing the child about to be born, while Gere stood beside them. The 3 worlds of his, love, faith, and family, converged in a single moment. In February 2019, son Alexander was born. Gere was 69 years old. In April 2020, son James was born. Gere was 70 years old. He also became stepfather to Albert, Alejandra's son from her previous marriage. The man the world still remembered as the sex symbol of the 1980s was now changing diapers at midnight, taking 2 young children to the park every morning, and teaching them about Buddhism with his wife. In an interview with El España in early 2025, he said, "We are happier than ever. My wife shines with openness and genuine gratitude." Then he added something that only someone who had failed enough could say, "She is a wonderful mother. In fact, I have learned to be a better father by watching her." In April 2024, Gere shared with Vanity Fair Spain a decision that few Hollywood stars had ever made, leaving the United States to live in Madrid. His reason was surprisingly simple. "Alejandra was very generous in giving me 6 years living in my world, so to be fair, I should give her at least 6 years living in her world." He sold the house in New Canaan, Connecticut, the house that once belonged to singer Paul Simon, bought for $10.8 million, sold for $10.75 million. The 32-acre estate, built in 1938 with 6 bedrooms, 11 bathrooms, a separate guest house, swimming pool, and expansive gardens amid the woods. After the sale, the house was planned to be demolished to build 9 separate lots. An architectural preservation business worked for many weeks to save the oak doors, steel window frames, and antique bluestone before the bulldozers arrived. The house disappeared. But Gere did not look back. He said, "For me, Coming to Madrid is a big adventure because I have never lived full-time outside the United States. I love Spain and the ability of Spaniards to live while conveying joy and happiness. The family still keeps a house in upstate New York, planning to return after a few years. And he admitted there was something he missed. New York gets into your blood. It's very hard to get rid of. But then he added, if she is happy, I am happy. From philosophy to the stage, from Hollywood to Buddhism, from New York to Tibet, from America to Spain, Richard Gere's entire life has been a journey of searching, and Madrid may be the first place where he felt he no longer needed to search. Not because Madrid was perfect, but because he was finally next to the right person. But the rebirth was not only in private life. At age 75, after nearly 50 years in film without ever playing the lead in a long-form television series, Gere took the role of Bosco, CIA London station chief, in The Agency on Paramount+, alongside Michael Fassbender and Jeffrey Wright, produced by George Clooney. The series premiered in December 2024 and returned with Season 2 in June 2026. In the same year, 2024, he reunited with director Paul Schrader in O Canada, 44 years after American Gigolo, the film that made him a star. This time, he was not playing a charming gigolo anymore. He played a dying filmmaker, sitting in front of the camera for the last time to look back on his life and confess that everything he built was based on lies. That role, in a small film screened at Cannes, was perhaps the most accurate image for this phase of Gere. Homer James Jigma Gere was born on February 6, 2000 in New York, a name carrying 3 layers of meaning. Homer after his paternal grandfather, James after his maternal grandfather, and Jigme, fearless in Tibetan, following the faith his father had chosen as the compass of his life. The boy grew up amid his parents' divorce, during the years when Richard Gere's name gradually disappeared from Hollywood, and amid the quiet of a family where the most famous father was also the most private one. Homer did not choose the easy path. He got into Brown, an Ivy League school, and graduated in 2024, showing that the Gere family values education more than fame. But after graduating, he stepped right into the very industry that had pushed his father to the sidelines for 2 decades. In 2026, Homer appeared in the role of Dylan Reed in Season 3 of HBO's hit series Euphoria, starring alongside Sydney Sweeney, and suddenly the Gere name was ringing again in Hollywood conversations in a completely new way. It was a breakout role, his first real one on a major film set, and Homer handled it with a calmness that was hard to believe for a beginner. He told Entertainment Tonight, "This is my first real film set experience, jumping into the deep end in a very interesting way." Next came a role in The Shards, the series adaptation of Bret Easton Ellis's novel, produced by Ryan Murphy. And then a movie he just finished with legendary director Oliver Stone. At age 26, Homer is moving faster than his father at the same age. Richard watches all of this with a pride he doesn't try to hide. In an interview with People, he said, "I'm proud of my son on 2 levels. 1, he's really good, almost innately knows what he's doing, but he's also handling everything really well. He's a good guy, he gets it, and this isn't easy work. Not everyone can operate inside it." Then he joked, and in the joke there was also the relief of someone who had carried the burden for too long. He has Euphoria. He has The Shards. He just wrapped a movie with Oliver Stone. I can retire now. That's the passing of the torch. But right after that, he added a sentence that only a man who had been through every bright and dark side of the entertainment industry could say. I don't think he has to commit to acting. He's good. He's enjoying it. But if he wants to do something else, he should do something else. That wasn't the words of a father who wants his son to follow in his footsteps. That was the words of a man who knows clearly what this industry can take away and wants his son to have the right to choose that he himself had to fight his whole life to keep. Homer also spoke about his father, and what he said reveals a lot. I don't run lines with him. He gives great advice. Not necessarily related to the acting profession, but more about how you carry yourself, how to make this job more positive. Richard Gere did not pass on acting skills to his son. He passed on what he considers more important, the way to exist in an industry without losing yourself. That is the lesson he had to pay for with 20 years of being banned from the Oscars, with a permanent ban from China, with dozens of lost roles in order to learn. And now he gives it to his son for free. Richard Gere is not a victim of Hollywood. He is not a Buddhist saint. He is not the tragedy of an old star forgotten. He is a man who has lived at both extremes of human experience, desired by millions, and turned his back on by the very industry that created him. And at both extremes, he chose to react the same way. Stay silent, stay firm, and keep living. 90 seconds at the Oscars in exchange for 20 years of being banned. Supporting Tibet in exchange for a permanent ban from China. Staying silent in the face of rumors in exchange for 40 years of rumors following him. But every price he paid came with something he kept, and what he kept was always something no one could take away. Conscience, dignity, and the inner freedom of a man who knows what he is living for. From philosophy to the stage, from Hollywood to Buddhism, from Tibet to Madrid, his whole life has been a search. The boy who dropped out of college because academic philosophy wasn't vivid enough. The stage actor who stepped into film because the stage wasn't wide enough. The Hollywood star who stepped into Buddhism because fame wasn't deep enough. The Buddhist who stepped onto the Oscar stage because silence was no longer enough. And the man who paid the price for all those choices finally stepped to Madrid, where he feels he no longer needs to search. Not because he has found the answer, but because he has found peace with not needing an answer. At age 76, he lives in a European city thousands of miles from Hollywood, with the woman he met when both were wounded. Raising 2 young children he had at ages 69 and 70, watching his eldest son step into the very industry that pushed him aside, meditating every morning, and still speaking up for Tibet after more than 40 years, no louder, no softer, just steady and patient the way he has always done. He no longer needs Hollywood to love him. He has found the most important audience, himself. At the beginning of this story, we asked the question, how could a man standing at the peak of Hollywood voluntarily step down and find peace on the other side of that surrender? Now, perhaps the answer is clear. He didn't step down. He stepped forward. There is a big difference between those two things. The man that millions of women dreamed of turned out to be the man that Hollywood didn't dare to keep. But perhaps the real paradox isn't there. The real paradox is that Hollywood didn't dare to keep him, and he didn't need to be kept either. When you look back on Richard Gere's life, which movie touched you? Was it Pretty Woman, An Officer and a Gentleman, or a small movie that few people know about? Please share in the comments below, because the real legacy of an actor doesn't lie in the awards he received, or the awards he was denied, but in the memories of those who sat in the darkness of the theater and felt something change inside them. If this story touched you, please subscribe to the channel and hit the notification bell so you don't miss the next stories, where we tell about people who have lived truly in a world full of scripts. Thank you for staying until the very end. See you in the next video.